Emotional intelligence is an essential part of business and life. Today, it seems, however, that many persons they have the emotion without the intelligence. It seems as though you have to create the scenario where you really have to nurture a culture where people are truly able to learn, apply, and master the essential tools relating to emotional intelligence. Now, with emotional intelligence, it makes you self aware, but it also enables you to be aware and sensitive and responsive to your environment, all of which you need to position yourself for success. Today, I have a very dynamic personality that is an expert with emotional intelligence and performance management. But today, we will do a deep dive into emotional intelligence and really examine the significance of emotional intelligence when it comes to starting and scaling a business and when it comes to enabling you to become the best version of yourself. So without further delay, I want you to encourage you to join me in welcoming no other than Tony Nan. Tony, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Gary. How are you?
I am phenomenal.
Good. Well, me too.
And always great to be talking with you to really pick your brain on the concept of emotional intelligence. How important is emotional intelligence, Tony?
Very. It's extremely important, not only in our professional lives, but in our personal lives as well. It sort of dictates the quality of your life. And this is something that people have to pay more attention to as they go through their daily routines. I mean, there are a lot of things now, especially post COVID or even during COVID, that affected people's mental health. And that ability to manage ourselves, not only to manage ourselves, but how do we manage the people around us, and how are we self-aware? Do we know how we show up in the environment? And do we understand how it affects the people around us and the work itself? So it's very important, extremely important.
Emotional intelligence very much sounds as though it stands on your ability to know self. It stands on your ability to embrace your true sense of self. It stands on your ability to shine in your authentic self. But Tony, what I've seen, many persons, they struggle with this. They struggle with finding self and embracing self and living from that authentic self. What do you think are those reasons that are preventing people from living in their true essence of themselves? Is it a lack of education, the lack of programs along these lines? What are your thoughts in relation to this?
Yeah, well, first let's see if we could define what emotional intelligence actually is. This is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and to recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. And remember, our behaviors themselves comes from childhood. We have an early environment that dictated how we actually behaved and the values we formed, the beliefs we formed. So one of the things that affects us mainly is how aware are we of ourselves? Do we have a level of self-awareness that could drive the other components of emotional intelligence, which is social awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management? So self-awareness is really the key component in that equation. If we are not self-aware of how we actually show up, then it's going to affect the other components as well. So where does that self-awareness comes from? From our early environment. We have love and connection. And some people like to say attachment. So love and connection from our who created that environment in the first place. There's a formula by Kurt Lewin that I talk about all the time, and that is behavior is a function of a person in an environment. And if we looked at the first time we experienced an environment, it was in the womb. That is where we experienced our first environment. That experience in there dictated some of our behaviors, and there are a lot of studies that prove that. When we are born to either biological parents or adoptive parents. So they created an environment that dictated how we behave. As we get older, those experiences that we had sort of formed our values, our beliefs. The beliefs came first, and then the values formed as a result of those experiences that created the beliefs. So that affected all of us, and that also dictated, or it also showed or determined how people are different. So now, when we grow up and we go into work environments, we have a whole bunch of people who are different from us, and we have to learn to manage that But the only way that we could manage that is if we are self-aware in the first. If we are aware of how we show up, then we are able to manage the people around us and the situations around us.
But Tony, would you agree that we have a global epidemic from the perspective that the majority of the people in the world really do not understand self? In many cases, we might want to say the way you are is based on your environment. But the reality is that many persons are not in the environment that speaks a lot about self-awareness, that speaks a lot about self-actualization. So to really flow in the essence of your true self is more accidental than intentional. And I do believe that in today's world, there need to be a stronger effort to make your language, your platform more intentional for the common man, more intentional for society as a whole. Because I'm saying this also that what we have seen also is that when an individual is socialized, either through parental experiences or through community or experiences or organizational experiences, but they're socialized to reach the full level of their potential, or at least put on a pathway to self-actualize. They function better as a human being. They're able to make more impact on the organization, and by extension, they're able to make impact on society. That type of socialization is not as common as it should be. Do you believe that we have a global epidemic when it comes to the environment not being available to nurture people to flow from that sense of self?
Yeah, I think it depends on which organization you are in. Some organizations are making an effort to develop people in this respect. Yes, there are problems, and what I find is that when you go to different countries, there are cultural differences. For example, here in the Caribbean, we are a very collectivistic society, so we tend to be very different from people in the individualistic countries. We tend to focus on team and community, and where people in individualistic countries tend to focus on, I'm in this to just get things done myself, and that sort of creates a problem. But there are companies who are making the effort to develop people from start to finish, which is how the question we have to ask is, how are they managing the performance of people within the environment? Are they developing them? Are they coaching? Are they giving feedback? Are they developing skills and knowledge? There is a push now because companies realize that they have to do this now, because this is how they create differentiation within the environment. How is one company going to be different from another company? How are they defining and demonstrating their values? We need people with the right behaviors, and to get the right behaviors, you need people who can manage themselves well. So this is something that we always have to think about. It's not a destination we are aiming for. It's a way of life we are aiming for. When companies have their core values, they have to live those values. And in order to live those values, we have to define the type of behaviors and skills and knowledge that we want within the company. So if companies are paying attention to that, then chances are they are going to manage their people well, and you will have improvement as you go forward. But I realize that emotional intelligence has had a big impact on many companies, and will continue to, if people would pay attention to how it fits into their organizational environment.
Great. Tony, I want to reflect on some realities. I can recall many years ago interfacing with the corporate environment, interfacing with some academic environment. There's this perception that you cannot be soft, you cannot be emotionally intelligent, you have to be tough. And very often what you see is that many person that comes through certain academic platforms and certain corporate settings, their personality, that emotional intelligence side tend to be more silent. Today, I think that there's a cry now for that emotional intelligence side. Did you see anything like that? I mean, in your experience, where the ideology within the organization and an institution is silence emotional intelligence? You got to be tough. You got to be, militarized if you want to do business and succeed in business.
Well, I think companies have to first define the type of culture that they want to have. If you have a whole bunch of autocratic people who are very bossy and they get things done, and they come across like a driver personality, then that has to be adjusted. There's space for that. I'm not saying there's no space for it, because in the past, what you have noticed, let's go back a bit, let's look at the communication styles. Let's look at one in particular. Let's look at maybe DISC. In DISC, the DISC personality profile, there are four personality profiles in there, right? There is the dominant personalities, there is the influential personalities, there is steadiness personalities, and then there is conscientiousness. These styles are very different. And in the past, you would notice that dominant personalities and very conscientious personalities tend to be the leaders most of the time because they are focused on results. The other two, the I and the S, they focus on relationships. So more and more companies are realizing now that they have to get things done, yes, but they have to focus on the relationships as well. This is very, very important because there's a different generation of people now. Our generation is not like it was back in the 60s and 50s and 40s and before. People had aim for quality of living. They just had to go to work, come home, get the job done and come home. Now it's about quality of life. And if you want to, especially with Gen Z and millennials, they are more about quality of life. Now, if you want to achieve quality of life, then you have to focus on not only to get the work done, but to get it done through people. That is critical to understand because this is where companies align with their values. Because if you look at some companies' core values now, they are not all about getting things done. A lot of those values focus on initiative and teamwork and community and that type of things you see often now. And if you are going to focus on that as a value, then you need to focus on your people. And that is core. But I'm not saying that showing that dominance sometimes and coming across autocratic sometimes has no place. That is part of being authentic for every personality style. But the idea is that when it comes to authenticity is not just about you. It's about how you are coming across to other people. And it has a big element of responsibility in there. So there is a place to be autocratic at times, but you still have to make sure and focus on the relationship. For example, if you are going to give someone negative feedback, as an example, it has to be given in a way that lets the person know, I'm still on your side. We are in this together. So does that make sense to you?
I'm with you.
Okay, good.
I'm with you. Now, what I'm hopeful for is that corporate leaders, in the interest of attaining competitive advantage, can relate to some of the things that you would have said. They have to attain this through the human capital. And the human capital today, especially when you become more self-aware, you're not working just for the sake of work. You're working because you enjoy doing what you're doing, and you're working because you want a better quality of life. That's what you would have expressed. And I think that everyone who would have gone through their studies, they are entitled to have that quality of life. And I think that the modern corporate leaders will take all of these factors into consideration. I do believe that a lot in terms of traditional corporate leadership has to change because what we have seen is that the Industrial Revolution key focus was on enhancing performance, all right, to the advantage of the organization. There's nothing wrong in enhancing productivity and enhancing performance and enhancing profitability, but should there be an equilibrium? Because looking at the equilibrium where the workforce feels and know that you are emotionally intelligent enough to understand that they too have dreams, hopes, and aspirations, and you are billing out your targeted performance outcome to impact their lives, is going to help them to be more motivated. And the more motivated they are in the organization, you most likely, once you have the right management systems in place, to increase productivity and achieve all the things that you want to achieve. Not only that, but I do believe that so much of new thinking within the organization has to be changed, because very often from my experience in working with many corporate entities, when we talk about creating culture to create positive impact on the workforce, one of the first things that comes up is the capital cost, the budgetary allocation to achieve the end results. And one of the things that I continue to emphasize to corporate leaders is that investing in the staff doesn't have to be a liability. When you understand financial instruments, when you understand different business strategies, that in of itself can become one of the greatest assets that the company is investing in. I will not go into that today. I love what you have said. I think we talked so far on emotional intelligence as relates to the individual. And I love that you did that because I do see that there, from my perspective, I see three levels to emotional intelligence. You're the expert, you may see more. The first level of emotional intelligence, I believe, it's the self. It's about you finding yourself. It's you cutting through the gray spot of what is the ideal self, what is the looking glass self, what is the self image, and really coming and become grounded in the real self. And to me, emotional intelligence really stands, the foundation of it is you understanding the real self. But I want to push a little forward as we go into that deep dive into what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence also is about finding your sense of purpose and self management. And as we begin to look at finding your sense of purpose and self management, this reminds me, or I want to refer to this as what I call the second level of emotional intelligence. And at this level, there's two accountability factors. You are accountable to yourself and you are accountable to the person next to you. You're accountable to others. I do believe that very often there is a lack of accountability to even self, and there's a lack of accountability to others, even more so. Would you care to talk a little bit about the second level of emotional intelligence? You may not necessarily reference this in my context. I know you have a four-step approach. I would love to hear how you relate to emotional intelligence, accountability to self, and accountability to others.
Right. So let's talk about accountability to self first. And to start this, I want to share a story. When I was about 11, I believe it was around 11 or 12 years old, I was playing Monopoly with a lady who used to take care of us when we were small. My parents. When we were playing Monopoly, she ended up on buying Boardwalk. You know, Boardwalk is one of those properties. And during the game, she put two hotels on Boardwalk. The game was going on for quite a while, and I ended up on Boardwalk. And the money I had to pay out from my bank was more than I actually had. So immediately I took the whole board and I threw it aside. Game was done. I just couldn't handle it. You know, I was only 11 or 12 years old at the time, but later on I realized that managing myself had nothing to do with the people around me. It had to do with me. So one of the things I did along the way is learning to recognize the emotion you are feeling. I know in some circles they talk about giving it a name and whatever works for you is fine. For me, it was enough to recognize how I was feeling, because then the emotional hijack that we sometimes go through, the message eventually goes to your neocortex. If you think about the brain and its structure, the limbic region that has the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. That is where everything that we experience goes to first. That is where the emotional hijack is. But eventually the message gets to the neocortex, which is the logic and reasoning center. The only problem is the neocortex doesn't fully develop until we are about mid-20, right? So imagine me at 11 or 12 trying to figure this out. It would have been almost impossible. But like I said, as I got older, I realized that I had to take the time to recognize my emotion, because the emotional hijack now lasts a few seconds, if so much. Once you recognize your emotions, then you could decide at that moment, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to reframe your perception of what is going on, or are you going to take some other action? So that is our responsibility to ourselves, to learn to manage that emotion. But there are other aspects of managing yourself. How do we manage time, for instance? How do we set goals? Do we set deadlines? What is our mindset like? Do we have a growth mindset? Do we look at possibilities rather than problems? So it's to understand how many of these things do you need to involve in your life for you to be more effective at what you do. Once we could understand how we manage ourselves, then we could move to the social awareness and the relationship management, because now we have a responsibility to other people. But that is the relationship management part. That is the last part we will talk about. But in terms of social awareness, as long as we understand the nature of the style, like whichever tool you decide to use, some people use this, some people use Myers-Briggs, is to understand how people are different. Because how people are different goes back to what I said earlier. How were we raised? What was our parenting like? What kinds of beliefs and values do we have? Everybody is going to be different. But if we take the time to to have the conversations with the people around us, then we get to know who they are, how they like to be communicated with, just to name a few, and then we could be more effective in our own communication. But while we are communicating, we have to make sure that we understand that term that I talk about all the time, which is authenticity. We'll talk about that when we get to relationship management. But that is our responsibility to ourselves and to the people we work around.
You're making some very, very strong points. I'm going to come back to the neurocortex just now. I love what is being said. What I've recognized to manage oneself and to hold oneself accountable to oneself, you have to be grounded in the way you think. Tony, what I see very often, there is so much of room that is left open for this to happen. The majority of people today, they are not properly grounded. So to flow from that true sense of self, they're not grounded in the right way. And I can say this can go all the way into adulthood. Being grounded, being able to hold yourself accountable means that you should at least have a fair degree of data that really help you to make informed and educated decision, and you know why you're making those decisions because you're using your moral compass, not to make an emotional decision. But of course, we are talking here about emotional intelligence, but it's making an emotionally intelligent decision. And I find sometimes the neurocortex, and sometimes referred to as the prefrontal cortex, even at 2025 and going into the 30s, it is not fully developed because that socialization has not taken place properly as yet. So this is a very deep conversation for us to have. While the research shows that the prefrontal cortex, the neurocortex should develop by the time you reach the age of 25, from my experience, not necessarily so. There are many factors that influence how it develops, because the development of the neurocortex is largely to say that you are a fully functioning adult, you know the difference between right and wrong, and you're holding yourself accountable and others accountable to that. But the environment, I don't believe it is fully there as yet, that really helps an individual to make a decision that they're prepared to live with. I'm saying this also, Tony, because, and I know that you would find this, very often in an organization, people are making a decision not because it's how I'm grounded from my parent and from society. I'm making that decision because I am compliant with the status quo. And being compliant with the status quo doesn't necessarily mean that the decision that you're making to support the status quo is the right decision to make. How would you relate to this? I mean, do you think that people comply with the status quo for fear of creating a conflict, for fear of looking different, for fear of undermining the personal dreams and aspirations that they have for themselves, for fear of the clout of the institution? And if they're allowing fear, which is part of the amygdala, the fight or flight, to dominate, how much is it helping the individual and their emotional intelligence?
Yeah, this is something. Okay, let's talk about the individual first, and then we will go into the corporate environment. What people have to realize is we don't only have to think; we have to think about the way we think. And it's not that the neocortex isn't developed; it's that people haven't learned the skills a lot of the times for themselves, right? Or they have not been taught. And this is sort of, we're veering into performance management category now. So when companies decide that they have defined certain core values and they have defined the behaviors they want, they have to take the time now within the recruitment process to look for those behaviors that are natural in people that will fit in with their organization. But a lot of the times people hire based on the wrong criteria. And some people find themselves in jobs where they don't agree with what is being done. They don't agree with what is being said. And maybe it's the culture of the company to shut people down. Not every company is like that. But the companies who encourage a level of psychological safety would listen to what people have to say, take their ideas, because there's a difference between consensus with your employees and getting a commitment from them. You don't need consensus all the time, but you could get commitment even without consensus. And I know that sounds strange, right? But let me explain. Let's suppose a leader was in a meeting. They said something and one person did not agree, or two people, it doesn't matter. If the leader took the time to listen to what they had to say and then gave a response like, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Nigel, that is a good point. However, we can't go with that idea this time because of these reasons. I am acknowledging what the person said, but I'm also telling them that we can't, the reason why we can't go with that decision. I am more likely to get commitment from them if I have listened to them. The problem is when people don't feel listened to, and I've seen that a lot here, where people will be in meetings and the leader would ask for feedback and everybody in the room is silent. Everybody in the room is silent because they are maybe sometimes fearful of saying something that would go against what the leader might be saying. And sometimes you see that. But this is when you look at Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, that very first dysfunction on there is the lack of trust. And that lack of trust comes from invulnerability, right? When people are not vulnerable, when they can't see themselves as, remember we talked about authenticity?
Mhm.
Authenticity, being able to accept your weaknesses, accept your downfalls, you accept your challenges, and understand that you have work to do too. When people are vulnerable like that, it makes them more approachable, and that increases the level of trust within organization. Then the other dysfunctions are not going to cascade upwards. It's going to be improved. So that is what we need from in linking emotional intelligence to the performance management concept that we are talking about.
Okay. I must say, I do believe that there's a lot of work that has to be done in helping people to really flow in their true essence, where they can become truly anchored with emotional intelligence. However, let us push forward, and I want to look at a couple of things. So far, we're looking at accountability to self and the role that emotional intelligence plays in this regard. And we can also look at the second element of accountability, which is accountability to others, and the significant role that emotional intelligence plays in this regard. I think that there is two sides to the emotional intelligence equation. One where the subject matter expert can leverage this body of knowledge in the wrong way. And on the flip side of this is where the intelligence can be leveraged in the right way to really add value and really enhance the quality of life of people. Can we go a little deeper into emotional intelligence and accountability to others?
Right. This is where we come into relationship management. Like I mentioned earlier, we all have a responsibility for others, right? But let's go back a bit. When we think of basic human needs, and we could go back to Maslow, for example, on his pyramid, there's love and belonging in there. I won't focus on the obvious things like food and shelter and achieve, but love and belonging is sort of a basic human needs that we all have. And I don't mean just the good people. I mean everybody. We all have to have that sense of love and belonging. Even why do children join gangs, for example? Because they want a place to belong, right? They want somewhere to belong. They want somewhere where they could connect with other people. They want somewhere where they could be themselves. And once we understand that about people, then it's for us to make the decision of how could we achieve that within an organization, within a family, within a social group. It doesn't matter. Everywhere it is important. So that is our responsibility now to others. Now we have to think about how are we going to do that? And how are we going to do that is one thing. When we talked about the communication styles earlier and how we are different, how are we adapting to the people around? How would you adapt to the dominant personalities, for example? Things to be bottom line. They like bottom line messages. They just want to know what you're going to do and by when. And that is their nature. As opposed to the conscientious people who may want all the details and they want details with everything that you are saying. The dominant personalities tend not to be like that a lot of the times. It is our duty now to adapt to those different types of personality. What do you think?
Tony, now cut to you. As we talk about the dominant personality, have you ever studied the characteristics of the dominant personality and actually what are those factors that are driving that dominancy? Is it the ability to speak fluently? Is it knowledge and experience? Is dominance meaning that you are always right? Because what I've seen sometimes, you have some people that are dominant, but then they're not properly grounded in their ideology.
Right.
And what I see can happen as we talk a little bit more of accountability to self. One of the things that I talk about is that you want to bring yourself to that point where you can master yourself, master the highest level of commitment to who you are. And I do believe that regardless of where you are in life, once you make that commitment over a period of time, you too will become a subject matter expert. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, the main fact that you have become knowledgeable about your field, you can stand up, and sometimes you need to push yourself there to push back. But that's another scenario by itself, because having knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that you're confident. Part of emotional intelligence doesn't mean that you are applying yourself the way you're supposed to apply yourself. But let's bring it back to the dominant personality. Are they always self-aware? Are they always knowing? Are they always right from your experience?
Not all of them. There are some people who are more aware than others, obviously. Some dominant personalities may know very well that they are dominant, but the idea is that when they look at themselves, they will realize that there are some things that they have to work on. For example, but where do these personality types come from? They come from our values. Dominant personalities value getting the work done. They focus on tasks. That is their value, as opposed to maybe a steady personality that is more focused on relationship. So that is related to their value. But one of the downsides of steady personalities is that many times they lack assertiveness. The same assertiveness that maybe a dominant personality may have, or the influence personalities in the disc model. The dominance personalities and the influence personalities tend to be the most aggressive personality, more aggressive personality. So, but that comes from their value. They are like that because of what they value. So that is their difference. Yes, but all of the personality types have downsides. Now the question is, are they aware of what the downside actually is? You know that there's some for example, in the influential personalities, one of their characteristics is they stop listening to you if you're taking too long. If you're taking too long to tell them something, they at some point stop listening. Have you ever noticed that?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, sometimes and that is their nature. But if
Some
they would,
people have a short concentration span. Some people, they just listen to a few points and then they're quick to respond without getting the whole story. That is a
right,
challenge.
right. So the conscientious personalities will want the whole story.
Mhm.
You see the difference? So everyone is different. But the caveat here is that as individuals, we have a little of all of those personality traits within us. It is just that under normal circumstances, one is dominant. One is dominant,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
We switch to different ones, but under emotional hijack and stress and that type of thing, and we may change our personality temporarily, but we always come back to that dominant one.
Okay. One of the things that I see is that sometimes even the introvert, with the right information, the right training, the right experience, there are situational dominance that we see takes place, and that's a good thing.
Well, it depends on if the introvert knows how to be assertive that way.
Good.
Right? Because what is assertiveness? What is assertiveness? Assertiveness is really looking for a win-win, but opening your mouth, but looking for a win-win in the situation, as opposed to somebody who might be dominant.
Good. And let me tell you what I find also as we look at accountability to others. There's a concept that we talk about, mastering the highest level of commitment to your MVTM. The MVTM, we refer to this as your minimum target market or your most viable target market. So it's the minimum viable target market and the most viable target market. You want to make a high level commitment to them. In business, it's largely about you making a commitment to be oriented to the market. That is emotional intelligence. In business, it is being sensitive to the market. That is emotional intelligence. Now, what we see happen sometimes with a rush to position yourself in the market, you take you take the intelligence and leave the emotion. You're responding to market perceived needs without being oriented, without being sensitive, but you're being responsive. And all of this plays into emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence plays a very, very significant role in the whole equation of business and in life. I can take emotional intelligence and I can swing it to elements of marketing.
Oh yeah.
One of the things one of the things that we were taught about is to take the time to understand your ideal client. And to understand your ideal client, it means that you're going deep into things like psychographics. Psychographic is what really helps you to understand what are their motivators, what are their drivers, and there's no better persons to be emotional intelligence by having those data points of the ideal client and knowing exactly how to leverage it to inspire or cause a particular reaction. That is emotional intelligence. I think that emotional intelligence, there's so much of depth and width to it. And I'm happy that we're having this conversation, but I want to look at a very positive concept, and that's how can we leverage EQ, emotional intelligence, to build wealth. I want to give an example, and then we're going to come back to what I call the third element of emotional intelligence. I want to share a story. This may have nothing to do with your talking points, but I do believe that I want to paint a very unique picture about emotional intelligence. And I do believe that emotional intelligence can also be leveraged to build wealth. Now, think about you want to acquire a piece of asset, but you don't have the money. How can EQ, emotional intelligence, provide you with an opportunity to do so? Now, EQ is going to help you to understand group economic. For any group to work, you need to understand the group. And it's not about you doing things in that group, all about what you want to accomplish. It's how you're going to ensure that you create win-win situation for you and the group. You talk about that earlier on, Tony, win-win. You put the right group together, you identify clear goals, and collectively you work towards achieving that. That too is emotional intelligence, because alone you may not have all of the pre-qualification to achieve an end results. But because now you understand emotional intelligence and how to work with people to achieve specific end results, you're now able to leverage emotional intelligence to accomplish so much. I know we didn't get deep into the relationship part as yet, Tony. One of the things I would always say is that relationship is the mother of all social system. That is whether relationship in the organization or relationship in community or relationship in specialized clubs. Investing in relationship, I believe, is a certain type of skills. You need to be good with emotional intelligence to really succeed in relationship building, relationship mastery, and for it to work. Would you care to shine some light on the importance of relationship in the context of emotional intelligence?
Yeah. Well, even if we take the intelligence out of it, just emotion alone is going to build relationship, right? But the emotional intelligence puts using emotion in the right way. One of the let me go back to an example that I experienced here. When the police service started enforcing the seatbelt law in Trinidad, they started charging people $1,000 if people didn't wear their seatbelt. One of the Now, at that time, just before that time, many people were not wearing the seatbelt, which is why they had to enforce the law in the first place. After they made the announcement that this was going to be a charge, everybody started wearing their seatbelt. So what changed? It gave us an emotional commitment now to wear the seatbelt, but it also did something really important. Today, when I jump in my car, the first thing I do is I put on my seatbelt. Not because of the law anymore, but because it became a habit because they enforced it. So when we bring emotion into the picture, into any sort of relationship, personal or professional, it drives people to us. So in success, in building the relationships around everyone that we have to build relationships with, it drives success. A lot of the times you get certain things done when you develop the relationship with the people you're trying to get it done with. This is crucial to understand, but it's important to understand how do I build these relationships. It includes everything that we have talked about, adapted to those communication style and acknowledging what people have said. We didn't talk about acknowledgement yet, but this is one of the key concepts in relationship management. When you are in conflict with anyone, one of the things that we always must do, and it doesn't matter, this is not about agreeing. I want to make that very clear. This is not about agreeing with the message that is coming at you. This is about acknowledging what they said so that you could mentally exist inside their head, right? As long as you acknowledge people, that is what
Yeah.
right. So that acknowledgement is very powerful. If you said something to me that you disagreed with, and I said something like, Gary, I would be upset too if that happened to me. just simply acknowledging what you might be feeling has a lot of power in where the relationship goes from there. And this is important to remember in any relationship, as just as important as the other aspects like adapting and empathy and everything else that we
Good.
talked about.
I want us to go one step deeper into relationship and emotional intelligence. And we can look at this from a corporate standpoint. Perhaps you can also look at it from a social standpoint. What I've seen in a corporate situation, to nurture healthy, productive relationship, it is necessary for you to have targeted performance outcome. And targeted performance outcome is not only about what I want to accomplish. Targeted performance outcome is also the value that I'm prepared to add to the organization. And it's to ensure that there is a balance between this. Because if you find yourself in a situation where you're given, and emotionally and intelligently, you're going to be saying to yourself, this is not working the way I want it to work. And the flip side happens when you're taken, and you don't have to give. The other side of emotional intelligence says to you that this is a grabber. This is a gold digger. I love all that is being said, but I'm thinking that for a relationship to work the way it's supposed to work, there must be an equilibrium, balance in giving and taking and in sharing. How important is this in the equation of managing relationship? And do you see emotional intelligence playing that significant role in creating the balance, the equilibrium?
Yes, absolutely. You see, with when you're talking about organization, remember it's not just about the leader and what they have to do and what they have to be. It's about what are the employees like. But remember, the leaders create the environment, and in order to create the right environment, you have to be a fairly emotionally intelligent leader. But the other thing that you were talking about just now is the alignment with
Yeah.
employees and the organizational environment. If the organization took their time and goals and goal talking about goals is not just about what you have to achieve. It's also about what are the behaviors we have to demonstrate in order to achieve, and are those employees aligning with the behaviors and competencies that we have achieved for the company. And the leaders have to make sure that they continue these conversations to ensure that the employees know exactly what is expected of them. And that happens through conversation, emotionally intelligent conversations, I might add. What are the expectations? Are we having those conversations? What are the performance conversations like? Are they two-way or are they just one-way? Have we had the well-being conversations that we need to have? When was the last time you went to your employee and find out how they were doing personally? Do we do that? What is your level of feedback? How do you give it, even if it's negative? If it's positive, do you give it at all? And is there a level of coaching that you are using to develop the employees that need it? And is there a developmental goal attached to that from your performance conversations that you have had? Is all of that in place? If all of those things are in place and they are done the right way, good. If not, then we have some work to do. But all of these things come from what core values did you define as a company? Because nothing exists in a vacuum. If you promise your customers these values, you have to make sure that people are behaving in ways that customers would get that value in terms of the experience. Because customers are looking not just for the product or service, they are looking for the people and the processes that they have to go through as well. All of that is part of the experience they want to have. So it's a big picture view. It's not just one thing. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Nothing.
Great. I love what was said, and I want to push to what I consider to be the third level of emotional intelligence. In my view, I believe that highly intelligent people, they think ahead. I believe that highly intelligent people, they see beyond problems. And highly intelligent people are able to take informed action to achieve a desired end result. Emotional intelligence. But very often, as we even reflect back on the last statement I made, should there be an equilibrium in the targeted performance outcome? The employer has targeted performance expectations, and he is also fully aware that the employee and the customers, they have expectations too. And it's how am I deploying emotional intelligence to ensure that I am not only reaching these expectations of the employees and the consumers, but I have systems set up to exceed those expectations. So that in itself plays into how the leader is thinking ahead of these things, how the leader leader is seeing beyond some of the problems, because some of the problems that you will see is that there's a capital cost for doing all of this. But seeing out beyond the problem is where you're able to see that the capital cost can easily translate into an asset, not a liability. But it requires a certain mindset, a certain way of thinking for this to happen. And I want to expand some of what I'm saying into 2020, 2021, 2022. At the dawn of the global epidemic, we have to ask ourselves, did we see corporate entities at the peak level of emotional intelligence, or did we see something different? I know you smile. But I do believe that the process of thinking ahead was not effectively deployed. The process of seeing beyond problems was not effectively deployed. And the process of taking informed action was not effectively deployed in the context of emotional intelligence. What are your thoughts on this? And moving forward, and we are about to wrap up now, Tony. Moving forward, is there a new corporate culture that we need to bring to front to ensure that we can help corporate leaders to not repeat the past? Because they say, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And the last thing that we in a modern day and age should want to have happen is that we know that something has happened, and because we didn't have the peak level of emotional intelligence, how it affected millions of people. Just your thoughts, Tony.
Yeah, sometimes it's not COVID was something that nobody expected. To some extent, we can't blame leaders for not knowing what to do immediately. But what I will say is that some leaders adapted well in terms of moving people online, and their use of technology in having people work home. What happened now? Look at what is happening now. Many people never return to the office. People are still working in a virtual environment or hybrid, and that is something that is here to stay. But look at what came out of it. Look at all the technology that developed. Look at the people that came out and started so many things online. I mean, people adapted, and people with higher emotional intelligence probably did a little better than the others. So when that hit, what happened was expectations had to change. How we communicated had to change. How we are going to handle conflict had to change. How are we going to talk about the expectations and performance? That had to change. Maybe key performance indicators had to change. Behaviors had to change. Many things that companies had to do, they did. But there are still some that struggled with not seeing their workers at the office. And they never expected that. They were thinking, these people are at home. They're not doing any work. But this is where we have to define what the goal should be. What are those expectations? Have you adjusted them to suit what is going on now? So I have no doubt that if it happens again, that people will be more prepared to deal with it, because history teaches us a lot. Since the beginning of
You're
time,
correct.
it has
Mhm.
taught, it will teach us a lot, and it will continue to teach us a lot.
Yeah, and some
So
of the harsh, yeah, some of the harsh realities that we have to look at. I think as I look back at the global pandemic, we saw that many persons who were unemployed or lost their job, the national insurance benefit didn't cover that. It didn't cover that. Those persons, they had student loans to pay, they had mortgage to pay. I know in some countries they had the moratorium on some of these things. They had food to put on the table. You didn't have national insurance to cover that, and you didn't have private insurance to cover that. So that tells me that there's a big gap in terms of institutional support to deal with certain factors that can threaten the quality of life, and we can say human existence. And perhaps this is something that we need to talk about, and I do believe that emotional intelligence also play a very pivotal role in that. Some lessons that we have learned also is that in the developed world, they develop things like paycheck to paycheck program to help to build a cushion. So the companies that they consider perhaps was too big to fail, and even some of the smaller companies, they were allocated a sum of capital that the intention of the allocation was to ensure that no one that is employed lost their job. So they were able to, maintain employment, and persons were able to maintain their income. So those are some of the best practices. But as great leaders, as I said, we think ahead, we see beyond problems, we take informed action to achieve the desired results. There are still other things for us to think about. All right, there's still work to be done in looking at the past and saying to ourselves, as a great leader, if this repeats itself, the outcome must never be be the same because we are emotional intelligent. We are the intelligent being, and we're going to put this, and this social safety net, economic safety net in place to protect business and to preserve human experience. So I do believe that emotional intelligence plays a very pivotal role in all of this. And Tony, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and I want to give you a chance to perhaps say anything that you might have wanted to say, but I did not ask. Please go right into it.
No, I think we covered quite a bit, but it's important that you brought up what happened during COVID and beyond. So it's not so much only about the people and how emotionally intelligent they are. It's about we have new frameworks now to work, but we need people to work with them, and we should never underestimate the value of people in any business. We need to focus on it, and not just about having people do what they have to do. It's all about making sure that we understand the core essence of human behavior so that leaders know exactly what they should do to maintain relationships and drive productivity forward. That is crucial.
Yes, I was saying it's always a pleasure to be talking with you and always picking your brain on emotional intelligence. I like your depth. I love your wit on the subject matter. And we're going to be doing so much more talking on this particular subject. What I also like, Tony, is that we are seeing the problems and we are not waiting for the opportunity to go articulate. We're going to be creating some opportunities. And I'm looking forward to have your thesis, your books in the Science of Success University,
Yes.
where we want to take a proactive approach in looking at the science, the theory, and the practice to really positively impact the corporate sector and human lives at the same time.
Yes, great. I'm looking forward to it, Gary, and thanks a lot for having me on.
Man, you're welcome anytime, and we'll do this again soon. All right, my friend. Thanks again.